Obviously, his presidency, his election, and is a symptom of a larger problem of polarization and distance between and failure to be able to find common ground between liberal progressives on one hand and maybe more conservative folks on the other. Why are you worried about reconciling with the modern zeitgeist? That's not No one's discussing that. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm
but
not discussing that. So like, Karima is interesting because she stands out, I think, from the other transmitters of Bukhari in that she has this insistence on muqabalat al-asl al-far', right? Behave civilly and create an atmosphere and a communal ethos of belonging and unity, or you can make it one of divisiveness and rancor.
Salatu Wassalam ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man wala. Welcome to another edition of the Karima podcast with a very special guest, with Asim.
Who's also a special guest, mashallah.
So the two Asims together, but also all over the Atlantic. We have Professor Dr. Jonathan Brown joining us, inshallah ta'ala.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, Dr. Jonathan Brown, he was in Wickham. We had him in Wickham. I don't know, when was it?
January, late Jan.
Oh wow, late January.
The end of January, yeah.
That event sort of ruffled a few feathers. But just to introduce Professor Jonathan Brown. Professor Jonathan Brown completed his PhD, University of Chicago in 2006 on the canonization of Bukhari and Muslim, or just Bukhari?
Bukhari and Muslim.
Bukhari and Muslim. And then, right now he's the Al-Walid bin Talal Chair of Islamic Civilization in the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. Well, that's what your website says. And he's written many books defending Islamic apologetics, defending Islam, defending the Prophet Salalahu Alayhi Wasallam, Islam and slavery, or slavery and Islam. Did you consciously choose to make it slavery and Islam rather than Islam and slavery?
Yeah, definitely. Do you want me to talk about that now, or do you want to finish the introduction?
Just finished that, actually, yeah. And he wrote Misquoting Muhammad. He's written Hadith, Muhammad's Legacy in the Modern World. He's also written Muhammad, a very short introduction. I have all of them apart from the canonization because it's just way too expensive to buy. Academic books are too expensive. But alhamdulillah, he's with us. I met him when I was in Turkey for the Ihsan Academy program. And he came when we were in Abant, when we were in it was like a resort. So when we were doing all the hard graft stuff with like Bursa, was it Bursa or Dirna or whatever, where the dot popped up when we came to the buffets and and
no, that place is the best food in Turkey. That place has the best food in Turkey, in my opinion. Abant is incredible. I mean, it's a well known historically for producing chefs for the Ottoman caliphs. Ottoman sultans, and that hotel has, I mean, it was just incredible food. I don't know if you remember it, but it was amazing.
No, I do remember it. There was a lot of Gulf Arabs there, and I actually saw. See, I'd never really, because we don't. I guess because we're like a closed sort of Pakistani community here, so I haven't seen many Arabs, but that was my first experience of Gulf Arabs, and I don't know if I should say this, but it wasn't a great experience. I saw blatant racism from them. Like this sort of Arab supremacy where they were very rude to the Turkish staff, the way they would talk to them. Some of them, I'm not saying like categorizing all Gulf Arabs are like that, but it was just a bit, it wasn't an amazing experience. But the food was good, and they thought that, that's why they were there. Alhamdulillah. So in the UK, at the moment, it's raining a lot because we've got like a big Storm Alex. But in America, you've got a lot of stuff happening at the moment.
Political storm.
Oh, it's nice and sunny outside here. I'm looking out my window. It's a beautiful day.
Oh well, we'll show you ours.
In Washington D.C. area.
So one of the things we really wanted to talk about, and I think, I mean, obviously there's lots of different topics, lots of interesting conversations, but I think it'd be remiss of us not to talk about the upcoming election. For those, I mean, the podcast is going to go out in about a week or so's time, but Donald Trump has been diagnosed with COVID. Things are. Sorry?
The debate.
Yeah, and then obviously there's the debate a couple of days ago. So how are things in America at the moment, just generally politically? And what's the kind of? I suppose in the UK we get this. We sort of had this understanding that obviously Trump, but then there's just so much misinformation. There's some subterfuge, and there's some lies, and there's bits and pieces, and it's just very, very difficult to try and piece together actually what the mood is like over there.
Yeah, I mean, it's very polarized, very, very polarized mood. I mean, it's pretty much been this way since, since he came into office. And obviously, his presidency, his election, and is a symptom of a larger problem of polarization and, distance between, and failure to be able to find common ground between, liberal progressives on one hand and maybe more conservative folks on the other, and a kind of a fraying of the middle ground, fraying of the common base of common culture, common political culture, common social culture, right? So yeah, you see this in every facet of life, whether it's life at university or art and entertainment or politics, obviously. So it's just his own conduct is it's rancorous, it's kind of disgraceful and rude and hostile and ad hominem, and he just seems to enjoy shredding or attacking the institutions that would provide generally like common ground for people. So things like the debate, right? I mean, the debate is a time to show manners and respect for others you disagree with, right? And show common devotion to common, allegiance or commitment to a political system. And, he didn't do that. He was just rude. And I mean, similar to the way he was with Hillary Clinton 4 years ago.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, so the guy's just awful. I mean, I don't, I mean, obviously I'm not a Democrat, right? And I don't support, certainly a lot of the policies of the Democratic Party. But, if the choice is between a guy who's going to generally try to solve problems versus a guy who's going to cause problems for fun and that's his whole modus operandi, I'm going to definitely take the former rather than the latter. And, I mean, he's just a destructive force in people's lives.
Because obviously we have like an Islamic principle of the ruler is a reflection of the class that he rules and the society that he rules. Do you think that Trump is a reflection of American society generally?
I mean, I think he's a reflection of the worst parts of it. I mean, I think that he's kind of like an id. He's just this id without any restraints. I mean, I think there's, I mean, I can just say for myself, like, there's, I'd say probably, if Donald Trump starts giving a speech or something or talking, if I watch him talk, which I rarely do, right? I mean, I'm a lot of the time I'll laugh, I mean, or the way he talks, and there's parts of the way he expresses himself that really remind me of like for example, my father, even though my father would never agree with Donald Trump's views, like just the way that he talks and the way that he can be so dismissive of people. I mean, it's funny, but I feel guilty laughing at it. But I mean, I think it reflects a lot of, kind of very elite, arrogant sentiment that you find in, certain classes in the United States. And, and then, every once in a while he makes points that are really good points because, like a lot of the, let's say, progressive agenda is, I think pretty absurd. And sometimes he'll call out and point out some of these absurdities. And when he does that, that's the kind of thing that I think his followers or people who like him, that's what they really like him for, right? Is that he's going to call BS on all these, all the pretenses and progressive beliefs that are so removed from reality. And so when he does that, yeah, that I agree with those comments or those ideas, but unfortunately, those are only a minority of his positions.
There's a lot
And
of
unfortunately, they come along with this destructive conduct and destructive tone that has been so harmful to public life in the U.S.
in terms of Muslims and political allegiances, obviously because post Al Gore, I read somewhere that Muslims were generally Republican until early 2000 in the election between Gore and Bush, and so now isn't there, because there's a case of like, especially with the Democrats, with Biden and they sort of. I remember there's actually a quote from Malcolm X, I think it was, or somebody who said words to the effect like, as black voters, don't let the Democrats take your votes for granted, that they're not going to do anything and they just assume that you're going to keep voting for them without making any actual transformative change. And one of the things with the Muslims is there's been like, in terms of the Biden campaign, especially what they did, I know a lot of people are taking some sort of, they're really enjoying it, but what happened to Linda Sarsour, where she came out for the Biden campaign and they sort of abandoned her straight away, and then later they were, especially because both sides are very sort of pro-Zionist. So what can Muslims really, should Muslims, I mean, there's no real third option, but what can Muslims really do? If Biden's just going to take them for granted and he's going to throw he's going to throw them to the wayside, then is it really strange that people are just flocking? There are Muslims who are now flocking to Donald Trump as their sort of guy.
I mean, I don't know why you would vote for Donald Trump. I mean, if you vote for Donald Trump, you might as well just vote for massive destabilization of American society and politics. I mean, that's just ridiculous. And especially because the people who tend to be Muslims who are like pro Donald Trump are oftentimes these like traditionalists who would say that you should never even utter a chirp of dissatisfaction against the ruler, or they're like pro UAE types. And I mean, I just don't see how you could argue that Donald Trump's presidency is in any way stabilizing factor or stabilizing, element in American political life. And in fact, imagine him without the fear of reelection, of having to be reelected. I mean, it would just be disastrous. So, I mean, I think if you care about stability, actually, you should not vote for Donald Trump. If you just think that you're just supposed to do whatever the Wali al-Amr says, and that, Sultan Ghashum Khairun min Fitnatin Tudum, then you should vote for Joe Biden, not Donald Trump. But I don't, that those people who are voting for Trump, I think, are just being silly. I don't think they have any basis, real argument. And okay, fine. Democrats take Muslims vote for granted, whatever. I mean, that's another issue. But I mean, just ask yourself, do you want 4 more years of this guy or not? I don't want 4 more years of this guy. So I'll vote for Biden.
I mean, you talk about polarization, and it is incredibly polarizing, but I wonder if that's part of, that's just part of the nature of the world that we live in now, because for Muslims as well, that's, we're now, I think as well, just seemingly feels like it's much more polarized, whether it's liberal Muslims versus this concept of now conservative Muslims. And that, I mean, again, I've only really heard that on from American Muslim commentators, really, where it's like, well, we should be voting for more of a conservative government because those align with our Muslim values and Muslim views, rather than the other side, which is going to be liberal.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a couple of issues there. Obviously, someone like, I mean, okay, there's a couple of issues here, right? So one, it's important to remember that in the United States, a lot of people's lives are run by local government, right? So things like schools, what you get taught in schools, things like that, this is all done through local government. So you can vote for, like when I vote, I always vote Republican in the school board. So if you, you can vote for conservative people in your school board, let's say, and you can vote for liberals for your senators or your congressman or your president, right? Whatever, right? So you can. That's an important thing to keep in mind. The difference between the U.S. and UK. Where in the UK, in the U.S. we wouldn't have something like this, the law that no outsiders type thing, which is just enforced across all of England and Wales or something, right? You wouldn't have that. Well, you do have some Supreme Court decisions that, let's say, make decisions or that shape how federal law is understood, and that can affect things like civil rights. which might affect issues of gender. A big decision like this came out in the summer, if you recall. But that happened, right, even with a majority conservative court, right? So this is one of the things, like, if you say, oh, I want to vote for Republicans because Republicans are going to kind of have this, socially conservative, religiously respect freedom of religion, and, they're going to name Supreme Court justices who protect these things and promote these things. Well, that's why people voted for Donald Trump 4 years ago. I mean, if you look at the exit polls, why do people vote for Donald Trump or against Hillary Clinton or for Hillary Clinton, right? It's all the largest factor was Supreme Court nominations and Trump won. He got to name 2 justices. And guess what? They still came out in support of, let's say, understanding gender as including, so sex discrimination includes discrimination against people who are transgender, right? If you remember this case, Bostock versus Clayton County, I think it was in July, if I'm not mistaken, where if you have an employee and they come out and say, if you have a company that's over, let's say, 50 people in size, and you have an employee and they say, okay, I'm now becoming a woman, you have to accept that. You can't fire them, right? You can't discriminate against them. And this was a conservative court that made this decision. So where's the alleged support that a conservative government is giving to kind of conservative social values? So that's one of the main problems is that a lot of these social changes are so, the trajectory is so long. We're already set on the trajectory. Once you make a couple of steps legally and socially, you can't really, it doesn't matter who's the president or who's the Supreme Court after a certain point. Some of the logic is already, it's already at work. Finally, this idea that, okay, maybe, certainly if you're a Christian or conservative Christian, then a Republican president and a Republican Senate is going to support you. Republican Congress is going to be working for your interests. But as you well know, right, the problem is that the people in America who would share Muslims' positions on social issues think Muslims are a cancer. I mean, they literally, evangelical Christians in America, major leaders, and I think a significant portion of evangelical Christians in America, actually don't even believe that Muslims worship the same God as Christians. Like this is an issue they're quite open about, and I've been on the radio talking about this, and I just remember recently discussing it again. They literally don't think Muslims worship the same God. So they consider Muslims to be not even to be a religion, that they don't even have. So even if they were to fight for protection of religious freedom, conservative Christians in this country would actually want to exclude Muslims from being able to benefit from those freedoms because they don't even think Islam is a religion. They think it's a political ideology. So again, where is this benefit that accrues to us, to a socially conservative religious community from supporting Republicans? I just don't see that benefit very much.
I think, like I said, though, it's just going back to that whole thing about it being polarizing and polarized already, is that people do have this concept of, okay, we can, so they may well have the arguments which you've taken a position against there, but then they also have this sort of discussion of, actually, if it's liberal, then when you talk about actually the wheels are in motion already, the steps have been taken, and people almost feel like if it's a liberal, really quite left-leaning, quote, progressive government, that train's just going to move faster. Those wheels are already in motion, but it's just going to go.
We have to put the brakes on.
Yeah, and we have to try and put the brakes on somehow.
Well, so there's a couple of things to keep in mind, right? So the Democratic Party is not a liberal progressive party. I mean, Democrats in America would be like conservatives in the UK, Now, the thing about the Democratic Party is, on social issues, it's the dog is wagged by the progressive tail, right? So this is, by the way, one of the major problems of the Democratic Party, which is that if you go out on the street and you ask just like random Americans what they think about a lot of, let's say, transgender issues, they think this stuff is ridiculous. I mean, I have friends, who voted for Trump because of they're not even religious. Like, they're white, just random white guys. They're not even religious. They're not. They just think the Democratic Party is insane because it's going and saying that, you can come in one day to school and say I'm a girl, and the next day you can say you're a boy, and they think that's ridiculous. And they also don't think that there's systematic racism in America. I disagree with them on that. But the point is that I think that my personal opinion, I'm not a political analyst and expert, but from what I understand, the problem with the Democratic Party is that on a lot of social issues, it is essentially hostage to a very, very progressive position, strain in the party, and this alienates them from a lot of voters who would otherwise probably support Democratic candidates over Republicans, and those voters end up voting Republican, right? So that's, I think, a big problem. And you're right in the sense that if there's a Democratic president, there'll be more sorts of things like federal regulations. There'll be more of like a progressive movement there, and that's one of the things that's happened under Donald Trump is that on the notion of federal, on the point of federal regulations, some of the changes put in place by Barack Obama actually were rolled back, but again, you have to weigh what the costs and benefits are, and if it were another reasonable Republican, I probably would, it would be a different question. But you just look at the destructive effects of Donald Trump on political life, on social life, on other countries, and it's just not worth it. I don't think much can make it worth it.
Just on that point, so with Biden, and I don't want to spend too much time talking about politics. This was meant to be just like a preamble. Politics can just go on. So Biden's like that center candidate. So he's bringing a lot of Republicans in. And because we had this sort of problem in the UK as well with Jeremy Corbyn, where he's the party was sort of hijacked, Labour Party, whereas the Labour Party isn't a very progressive party in its origins. I mean, like it's the Fabian Society and the foundations of it, but you have very strong sort of classic socialists, British socialists, who are sort of in the 1950s, 60s, who were strong on social values, community values, ideas of family and things like that. And then Jeremy Corbyn, the type of Labour Party he was running, suddenly just people just don't want to vote for them anymore. Traditional Labour strongholds literally abandoned him in droves. And now you have, say, Keir Starmer, who's named after Kay Hardy, who's one of the founders of the Labour Party, but he's literally, as the Labour leader, he's there trying to bring in, we're all about the military and we love the Queen and family values, because that's what British people and I guess American people actually do care about, that sort of stuff, patriotism, the religion of the American flag, and that's what sort of that even the left now in the UK at the least is sort of becoming more right. We have this whole blue Labour movement, but I just wanted to move on slightly from there. I remember in one of the podcasts you said your dad was a massive fan of Reagan, and Trump economically is using a lot of the same advisors that Reagan did. So you said your dad wouldn't have been a fan of Trump. What do you think about, what was it about Reagan that made it? Was it because he was funny, or?
I mean, look, what my father liked or didn't like is, I mean, it's interesting for me, but it's probably not, it's probably not very important, in a larger sense. But I mean, I think that to the extent that my father might have been, a representative of or an example of a larger trend in American society. I mean, he really thought that, I'm trying to remember. So he thought that President Reagan was not the smartest guy, but that he knew how to pick advisors, and he also knew the stuff that was important. For example, he knew that Soviet Union was an evil empire and that it had to be defeated. That's what I remember my father saying. That was, so if you ask me what were the things that my father liked about Ronald Reagan the most, I think that was it.
Okay, so then he probably wouldn't have liked Trump then. But
no, I don't think he would have at all. No, he died. My father died. I mean, in some ways, he's blessed that he didn't have to see this. He died it was before. it was before Trump became it was in the spring. So it was like Trump, the campaign was going, but Trump was just one of the many Republican candidates. And yeah, he died before Trump became the Republican nominee. So I'm glad that he didn't have to see that.
The reason I brought up, because it was a slight segue really, because I remember one of the things that really stands out about your books, having read a few of them, not all of them, but and inshallah maybe all. But there's a constant theme of, I'm here in Indonesia, I'm here in India, I'm here in such and such place, and there's a constant theme of travel. You seem to travel a massive amount in meeting scholars, going to traditional sort of, what do you like, mausoleums where pious people are buried and things like that. And so this and that's so. I remember you mentioned that your travel started before you'd even become Muslim. This idea of yourself as this sort of traveller, and you went with your father because he used to work for the World Bank, and you went to like former Soviet territories. Were there any like Muslim countries you visited under communism, or just coming off the back of communism at that time? Did you see Islam before?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, one of the first, I guess, Well, I went to Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan, and that would have been the summer of 1995. And
2 years old.
yeah, yeah, that was, I mean, but I stayed there for about 2 months.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I mean, I guess one of the things I saw there was just how, although I didn't realize it at the time, I mean, how just traumatized post-Soviet society is. I mean, it's like a really, really traumatized and broken and kind of fragmented and uprooted culture, especially the Muslim societies. It was what was done to them was brutal. It was really brutal, and that's not even anything. It was bad, but it was not as bad as what's being done in China now to the Uyghurs. But it was brutal. I mean, it makes what was this communism in Yugoslavia in 1946 to the 1990s was really not that severe compared to Soviet Union. I mean, you had like only in Soviet Union it was like 1920 basically until 1990s. So you had a whole maybe one or two more generations that were affected by it than in a place like Bosnia, and just completely deracinated and forced to, after the fall of the Soviet Union, forced to kind of come up with an entire new way to think about their culture and their identities, which are sometimes very, let's just say, interestingly thought out, with people like Tamerlane as national heroes and stuff.
In Uzbekistan, I saw that.
Questionable national heroes, yeah.
You went to. So have you been back? Like, because I know, because you wrote a book on Imam al-Bukhari. That's your PhD thesis. I mean, have you been to visit the grave of Imam?
Yeah, I went to Uzbekistan in 2006. So I went to Samarkand, Bukhara, Tirmiz, lots of places. And the grave of Bukhari is outside of Samarkand, so I went there. Yeah.
And in terms of like, I don't know, I think it's very open-ended to put this to you, but what, because there's the idea of the rihla fi talab al-ilm, and I don't know if you would make rihla fi talab al-ilm every time you would go, because sometimes maybe you just go for a holiday and stuff, but and the ulama were very insistent that in order to actually have life experiences and to be a proper student of knowledge, you have to leave your comfort zone, leave your home, leave your family, and go and study, and you'll come back after 30 years and maybe your mom's passed away while you've been gone, and maybe somebody else has gone and your whole society's changed, and some of them would leave wives and children and come back and the children are fully grown and things like that. Like, I remember there's a statement of Imam Ahmad who said something like, even if I could attain the knowledge in the community I live in, I would still insist on going to travel to ensure that I would whatever the ulterior benefits are of travel. So I was just thinking, like, what have you, like, how important do you think your traveling has been for you? And what have you sort of picked up as like life lessons in your many journeys?
Well, I mean, for most of my studying, where I was really staying for places like in Egypt for a long time, for like a year or half a year or wherever, at different points. that was all, before I was married, even before I was finished my PhD. So it was like, I was still a student. Still a student in the United States, and so there wasn't I didn't have a lot of ties that kind of held me, or kept. I had my family, my parents, or obviously my sisters, but I didn't have like direct attachments. So I was able to go and travel and spend a lot of time, spend months in a country as opposed to a week or 2 weeks or something. And I was able to meet scholars in Yemen and study in Yemen or Syria and places like that for a little while. But so that was, I don't think actually I could do. I often think about people like, let's say Ibn Battuta, and he sort of left this like string of children and wives around the world. And I'm not judging. I just don't think I could do that. I can't be away from my family.
String of wives.
Yeah, the string of. I couldn't, and it's not just you probably know people who have a kid in another country and a kid in another city, and they've been married 2 or 3 times, and I just can't imagine being away from my children. I just don't think I could accept that. So I don't, since I had children, I don't go away for very long at all. It's always just, or I take them with me, but I don't travel away from them. And in terms of lessons I learned, I think I really, I know this is kind of cheesy lesson, or obvious, but I've learned, the value. I've learned how tremendous hospitality is in other countries, especially Muslim countries. I've learned the way. It sort of puts me to shame in the way that I've failed to be hospitable and the way that I've failed to keep up my relationships with people. But it makes me try hard. I really try hard to be hospitable. I try hard to. What?
That's why you cooked today for your guest that came when you told us before.
Yeah. I do my best, So that's one of the lessons I've learned. You also learn that. Another lesson I learned is not necessarily a kind of an Islamic one, but more a scholarly one, which is the importance of visiting a place to understand the history. If you don't go to Khorasan, or you don't go to India, or you don't go to Yemen, you don't understand, let's say, why one city is related to another city, or why a person goes from one city to another city. Like, you don't get the actual lay of the land, and once you see the lay of the land, you understand the relationship between regions, you understand relationship between cities, you understand, why a certain culture, was spread here and there and not to another place. And you really, it brings the history alive in a way that is otherwise very difficult to understand, I think. So that's very important. I really learned that lesson well.
In terms of because one of the things I found unique about you, so I've heard this, and I don't know, we might have to cut this part out, but I've heard you are in creed, at least you follow the Athari creed, and you're Hanbali in fiqh, and Allah knows best whether I have heard truly or truthfully, or someone just told me. But one of the things I love about your books is like you're in Tarim or something, you're in some city in Yemen with a scholar, you're attending the Mawalid, you're at the grave, visiting the grave of a Sufi sheikh. And there's a constant, and you quote that I was reading, I was just flicking through your Slavery and Islam, I think it was, and you quote Busiri in the Burda, where he says, فَمَبْلَغُ الْعِلْمِ أَنَّهُ بَشَرٌ وَأَنَّهُ خَيْرُ الْخَلْقِ كُلِّهِمِ. And I was just thinking, do you think, because I remember you mentioned about your mother, she's a very open-minded anthropologist, and that made your experience of Islam much more open than most people who you would categorize as, and you could correct me again if I'm wrong, as maybe Salafi or Hanbali, Athari, whatever. But what have you, in terms of seeing Islam practiced in a myriad of different ways, how I don't know, in terms of the diversity of the religion, what have you seen? What have you seen there that stands out?
I suppose it's also the impression that it leaves on you from different different cultures, different approaches as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably not going to make people very happy, but I mean, so I'm Hanbali in my fiqh just because, you have to have one way of doing things, and because I find it to be a very interesting school to study. But, in terms of Aqidah, I mean, I guess I would lean towards the Athari creed. But I guess, I don't know, I'm mad at me for saying this, but like, I don't believe that like Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari or the Ash'ari school is somehow misguided or wrong. Like, I just don't, I mean, how can you tell me that all these amazingly knowledgeable, pious Muslims who were, I mean, I wouldn't be qualified to shine their shoes in any way, like not in knowledge, not in piety, not in taqwa, not in anything, Like, who am I to sit here and be like, oh, you guys are wrong. You guys are all wrong. That's why I follow. I just think that's absurd. I understand other people have these strong allegiances. I just don't feel qualified. The idea that I would be qualified to decide which path is correct, I find that notion absurd. Like, I am not qualified to do that. I will just take the benefit wherever I find it. And that's the same thing, with it comes to, let's say, Sufism or not Sufism. In my personal inclination, I am not Sufi, right? So I don't like the idea of visiting graves. I don't like the idea of asking dead people for help. I just don't find, I find that to be personally unappealing, right? And personally problematic from a religious perspective. But I also know that at least half of all the great Muslim scholars in history, at least half, had absolutely zero problem with that. And again, I am not qualified to shine those people's shoes. And so if someone, are you like Ahmed Zarruq says in one of his books, that Ibn Arabi is like Bain al-Qutbiyya wal-Kufriyya. Half the people think he's a Qutb, half the people think he's a Kafir. So at that point, you're like, okay, who am I? Like, who am I? Or someone like Ibn Taymiyyah, am I going to really say Ibn Taymiyyah was an idiot? No, of course. How can you possibly say that? How can you possibly say Ibn Taymiyyah was not an amazing, inspired scholar whose impact has been immense and positive? Like, I just don't, and I would say the same thing about Ibn Arabi. I'm not in a position to detract from these people's standing. So I try to take, خذ ما صفى ودع ما كدر from them. لنا خيرهم وله عيبه, لنا خيره وله عيبه, right? But and similarly, like, I'll always, sometimes I post on Facebook stuff about like the Tijani order, and people are like, how dare you post things about the Tijani order? Even like other Sufis are like, how dare you post things? The Tijanis are so exclusive, and they only pray in their own mosques. And I'm like, guys, you need to relax, okay? All I know is I've met people in Yemen who are Ba'alawi, and then Senegal who are from the Muridiyya order, the Qadri order, or Tijani order, or people in, wherever, in India and their Ahl Hadith or wherever. And I can tell these people their piety is immense, and I benefit from them. I benefit from their knowledge. I benefit from their dua. I benefit from their barakah. And I'm not going to ever close the door on those people. And I will celebrate those people. I'll celebrate what they have to offer us, and I'll celebrate the way that they can inspire us. And I don't foreclose on any part of our heritage. Of course, there's aspects of our heritage that are outside the pale. But even people like, let's say, Sir Sayyid Ahmed Khan, people will, justifiably point out real problems with Sir Sayyid Ahmed Khan. But at the same time, you see things he did accomplish, important things he did do. And then you also just value the energy and the passion and the commitment he had to our religion. And you can also treasure those things and learn from those things, even if you disagree with even like 80% of his thought, So I try to really embrace and learn from the world of our religion and its tradition, and not to kind of shut doors and condemn.
In terms of like, because you're talking, I remember reading about like the Mu'tazilites, and you read about Qadi Abdul Jabbar and these people, and they're like incredibly devoted to the faith, praying long nights to Tahajjud, even and things like that. And so it's very difficult to like completely discard them completely. But the one thing I did want to ask is, because you travelled so much, and I remember reading Malik bin Nabi, who said when colonialism happened, one of the things that stopped the colonialists from completely overriding the society were the Sufi Zawiyat, the practices, the institutions that had been left by the Zuhad and stuff in the various societies. Well, he's talking about North Africa specifically, but you see it, all over the Muslim world really. And one of the things we've seen is Sufism has become more and more, it's become this sort of taboo and this the black sheep of Islam, and we need to be very careful, and the Mawlid is now being discarded. And at the same time, you're seeing a lot of the problems in the West in terms of like, atomization, selfish societies, all that stuff sort of seeping in as well. In your experience while you were there in these Muslim countries, how like the Mawlid itself constantly happening and things like that, how important were they? Not religiously, because you said yourself that you disagree with some of the aspects of it, but just like from a sociologist perspective, like how beneficial were those things in order to maintain faith in those lands? Even maybe the communists and stuff like that, there must have been devotions that kept going behind the scenes, where people managed to keep onto their faith through their Sufi practices and the devotional idea that they
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I don't even find it problematic. I mean, I've been to lots of graves of saints with Sufis. I have no problem doing that. I just don't, I don't personally do like istighatha or tawassul. But I mean, I go with who am I the people that I'm with, again, are like Muslims who are they're a million times better Muslim than I am. Khalas, that's it. There's no debate about that. And I'm blessed and fortunate to be in their company. And if I wouldn't even go so far as to problematize any of the stuff you're talking about. I just am not going to. I just do not think that is. If you do that, you can have your critique, but that critique is, I think, is so limited in its perspective, considering what's happened to Muslims in the past 200-300 years. I mean, whatever keeps our faith alive, whatever keeps people devoted to God and the Prophet, whatever keeps them connected to that thread, like to the Urwat al-Wuthqa, is valuable and should be celebrated and trumpeted, right? And in a lot of ways, that's what I try to do in my work, in my writing, in my Facebook comments or whatever, is to always just celebrate these connections that we have to our religion. And you can pick which connection you favor more, or which one you think is better or more closer to an ideal truth. But that doesn't mean that you discount or discredit other threads, so to speak.
I think it's a really interesting conversation that sort of carries over, I suppose, into this whole concept of culture versus Islam. And I mean, from my personal experience, I suppose, going back a few years now, maybe, when I first started practicing, there were, and then you learn about people, and the people say, "Oh, don't go to that mosque because they do da 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 da. You want to come to our one because we're on the haqq, and we're on the truth, or whatever it might be." And it does get to that thing about culture, and especially we live in quite a small town of High Wycombe. There's not that many mosques, and there's not much of a diverse Muslim community, or back then there certainly wasn't. But it does lead to that question of actually, when people travel, like you've mentioned, you've been to Yemen, you've been to Egypt, and you've spoken about some of the Tijani Tariqa, for example. And just the diversity there, and then accepting that actually, well, they're all Muslim, and I might disagree, or might feel, not even disagree, but I might feel slightly unsure, or might, whatever it might be. But there's no animosity, I suppose. Whereas I feel like sometimes there's this whole concept and this question, certainly, of Islam versus culture, and then people always have this thing of like, well, no, your culture is.
And then, but some of those people who claim like, oh, there's been cultural influences in
Yes.
Islam. The Islam they do profess to practice has very strong influences of another culture. I don't want to go into in too much detail, but there's a very sort of Bedouin tribal Arab culture that then becomes the manifestation of their Islam.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I mean, I tend to think of the culture as being problematic when it has a negative influence. When it has a really negative influence. I mean, that's when I think that's when I usually would start to object to that. I mean, there's various things like, if you go to, let's say, Cape Town in South Africa, and you meet like, Cape Malay community there, they have, 400 years plus of Muslim life in Cape Town. And they have like aspects in which Sufism has impacted regular worship, although they're Shafi in general, right? And you can kind of go and you could object. You say like, I don't really like this thing they're doing, but they were there as slaves for a long time, as second-class citizens, third-class citizens, however you want to describe it. And look, this is just part of their life as Muslims, and you can't, you sort of ask yourself, to what extent are you going to sort of insist on trying to strip out certain things if they've had really positive role in there, and provided they're not kind of completely, they're not like worshiping another god or something, right? But then again, you see sometimes there's cultural elements that are really negative, like caste, like discrimination against people because of their skin color, like
A lot of marriage practices in the subcontinent.
yeah, I mean, like, just kind of misogyny or just really poor treatment of women, that kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, it is not, but I don't think that's not part of our heritage that is, I think, valuable or does anything for us. I mean, I think that's I wrote an article about this once, and of course I've gotten criticized by some of these like incel Muslims, Jonathan Brown's criticizing toxic masculinity. Yeah, I am criticizing toxic masculinity. I mean, what do you like? Do you really think that treating women like garbage means you're a man, or means you're like standing up for you have pride in your religion, or you're alpha Muslim, or all this stuff? Or you think that's how the Prophet, at least that's how he treated women? So. No, it's not how. I mean, that's not how he treated them. And you don't even, just embarrassing to think that. And so this sort of notion that this weird kind of alpha Muslim ideal is somehow involving talking nastily or dismissively or rudely to women, that's in somehow a valuable aspect of our heritage, I think that's misguided. I have no problem. But again, I don't critique that from the perspective of like, oh, we know today this is wrong. No, I don't believe that what quote unquote we know today means anything. I'm not going to modern Western urban norms, liberal norms, to critique my religion or these people's ideas. I'm turning to the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. You can see it's very clearly stated by by Aisha and by others, how he was with women. There you go. Halas, that's your source.
I mean, on that role of women, I guess that brings us to one of our because there is this sort of idea that I don't know about misunderstanding, because I read that article, and I had points that I did agree with, and I can't remember exactly like off by heart now what you wrote, but there were points where I had a few reservations, because this is a discussion we've been having as well in our local community, ideas of futuwa, chivalry, muruwa, reviving, especially in the Sufi tradition. We have this strong concept of the futuwa literature, Imam Sulami and others who wrote about this stuff, and it's a very sort of selfless, the selfless man who's willing to give up everything for everybody else, who overlooks the faults of his brothers, and things like that. But sometimes I think people do see, I don't know, because they do see sometimes the critique of what the modern definition of toxic masculinity is. There's a lot of things in there that are just traditional Islamic norms, and there is an identity of differences between the genders. I mean, I guess we're going to come to that next when we talk about Karima Marwaziyya rahimahullah, for example. But there is like a separation between, I don't want to say gender, there is, I don't want to see, you have to be careful what you say, but the idea of gender roles or just having different psychologies, وَلَيْسَ الذَّكَرُ كَالْأُنْثَى, and it becomes very difficult to sort of reconcile that with the modern
But I don't. Why are you worried about reconciling with the modern zeitgeist? That's not. No one's discussing that. I mean, I'm not discussing that. So, like,
it becomes reconciled with the modern zeitgeist in your attempt to sort of, we have toxic masculinity problems, and then instead there's a lot of, you co-opt a lot of liberal critiques.
Yeah. So I understand what you're saying. Right? So it's very easy for. Let's just say a lot of criticism of toxic masculinity is a criticism of any idea of masculinity, right? So, and I say that in the article, right? I mean, I say I'm not getting upset at you for not remembering this, but I mean, I criticize this sort of modern, sort of sort of the masculine who. Sorry, my picture just disappeared, but now it's back. Okay, who's essentially not distinguishable from a woman in any way, and the sort of collapsing of gender norms and gender roles. I don't agree with that at all. I don't think that Muslims should agree with that. But that doesn't mean you don't criticize toxic. I mean, there's entirely a different way to criticize toxic masculinity, which is the fact that it's betraying the sunnah of the Prophet. Which is, I think, I think that's very clear. So I think that, it's very easy to, not everything that is criticizing something that is conservative, quote unquote, it means that criticism is from a liberal direction. It can be from an Islamic direction. That's the point I was trying to make in the article. And this is, it's not like my idea, but I mean, we should talk about this more in general in our communities is, Islam is not a conservative or religious system. It's its own system. It's a system that's a wasat system, that's a moderate system that is treading the virtuous norm, the virtuous middle. And if someone's trying to pull you to the left, away from a right extreme, that doesn't mean they're trying to pull you over onto the left-hand side. They might just be trying to pull you out of the gully, sort of from one valley up onto the peak, not trying to pull you over to the other side, You mentioned. So I think we have to be aware of that.
For Yaqeen Institute, I remember the lecture now that you gave based off of the paper, and you mentioned the idea of the polarization, and that just because we're not on that side doesn't mean we have to by default now jump straight to the other side completely.
I mean, you can see I see this with these young Muslim men online and stuff. I mean, they're just, they might as well go and throw in with the these like incel women haters in the West. I mean, it's just I don't know what distinguishes them from them, and ultimately, you can't raise a family like that. You can't raise a family when you're just this vessel of indignation and insecurity and fear, and that's what that school of thought is. You need to be someone who's going to solve problems, not cause problems. You're going to need to be someone who heals other people and doesn't hurt other people.
Can we carry on into that?
All right.
That discussion?
Yeah, that's good actually, because then it brings us to, I guess, the idea of, there's a big movement recently to revive the idea of female Hadith scholarship, which has really been, I mean, in the UK obviously we have Sheikh Akram Nadawi, who's done a lot of work, the Muhaddithat. There was Asma Said's book, which I was just looking at yesterday actually on this, I think that's her name, who wrote a book on female Hadith transmission. And I guess, and we really wanted to discuss this with you because we are by name the Karima Foundation, named after Karima Marwaziyya rahimahullah ta'ala, who's one of the most famous narrators of Sahih Bukhari, which made you a perfect guest to discuss this with us. But I think I just wanted to start off with this idea, because you can I think give empowerment to Muslim women whilst also recognizing that there are different domains to an extent. Because one of the things you see throughout Muslim history is that women tend to be muhaddithat, and that's something you see consistently throughout Islam, but very rarely, not non-existent, but very rarely do you see the female faqih or the female mutakallima or the female mufassira and things like that. So and the accusation then is placed upon, oh, it's Islam with its patriarchal idea of women, or it's those Greeks that influenced Islam, and it was all by taking in so much Greek philosophy. Now they've undermined women so much. So I just, on that note, before we even open up on Karima Marwaziyya, why was it, like, what was the role, number one, for women in Hadith scholarship, and then why were they very specific to Hadith scholarship? Why didn't they sort of branch out to all other sciences?
Well, yeah, those are a lot of good questions. I mean, I think that in terms of not just Hadith, but in terms of the transmission of the Sunnah, women were very important in the companions and the successor generations. People like, obviously, Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, or Asma bint Abi Bakr, Asma bint Umais, Salama, who's, Hassan al-Basri grows up, his mother is a servant of Salama. And so they're very important in kind of transmitting the Sunnah, especially of the Prophet's home life, to and his home life, not just in terms of his relationship with his wives, but his home life in terms of his worship in the home, how he was in the home, to the next generation. And then they're very important. Well, Karima is interesting because she stands out, I think, from the other transmitters of Bukhari, in that she has this insistence on muqabalat al-asl al-far', right? So when she narrates, when someone copies her copy of Sahih Bukhari and she reads it out with them, that she actually will check the copy against the original, which is extremely rare. And Abu Muzaffar al-Sam'ani, who dies 489 Hijri, who hears Sahih Bukhari from Karima, does that with her and talks about her doing that. And then his the main copy of Sahih Bukhari that's used by al-Yunini to create what becomes known as the Yunini manuscript, right, or the Yunini edition of Bukhari. He's an Egyptian Hanbali. He has his copy has the copy of a Sam'ani made from, or a copy of Sam'ani's copy that he made from Karim al-Marwaziyya's copy, with her affirmation and comments on it. That material is recorded on the nuskha, the copy of Sahih Bukhari that comes from Abu al-Waqt Sijzi, that Yunini uses as his basis. So Yunini's recension, his copy of Sahih Bukhari, has Sam'ani's transmission from Karim al-Marwaziyya on it. So that's why we have Karima's her version, basically, of Sahih Bukhari, and her affirmation embedded in the Yunini tradition, which then is then eventually incorporated into things like the Sultaniya edition of Sahih Bukhari. So Karima is a very exact transmitter. In general, why are women really well known, or why are they important in Hadith transmission and Quran transmission? It's because some of them live very long. Again, men live long too, but some women live really long, and that's how they become important, because they become the longest living transmitters of a tradition. And the fewer the number of links you have in the chain of transmission, the less likely you are to have errors.
In terms of the fact that women tend to be more led towards hadith than anything else. I mean, I don't want to put forward like a thesis, but I've been reading a bit of Stephen Pinker recently, and he has a chapter in The Blank Slate about gender differences, and he argues about why aren't there more women in STEM. It's not because STEM is an inherently patriarchal, women hating what would you call
discipline.
It's in fact just because women psychologically do not prefer to work in STEM fields. They'd rather work somewhere else, and he tries to give evidences for that. And I remember I heard one sheikh, I won't mention his name, but he mentioned that the reason that you don't see a lot of women in fiqh and kalam is because those are very jadali subjects, where it's a lot of aggression, a lot of going back and forth. Things can get really heated when two fuqaha go really at it. I remember reading a story about one of the students of Ibn Taymiyyah having a debate with another student of Ibn Taymiyyah, and in the process one of them spits in the face of the other, and his response is, well, at least it's pure. I guess that's how fuqaha sort of see things. But there's a constant thing that happens. So do you think that's why women didn't necessarily choose to go into fiqh and kalam, or was it because...
Well, I mean, we have to remember that, people who wrote books, the books that have survived are a fraction of the books that were written by Muslim scholars. And the books that were written about Muslim scholars that we know of, even if they haven't survived, are a fraction of the books that were written that we don't know about, right? Of a totality. And the scholars who wrote books, whose books may or may not have survived, but we know about them, or we might not know about them, are a fraction of the totality of all the various Islamic sciences, and who made those part of their lives, and who influence other people by that knowledge, right? So what I mean by that is, just because we don't have lots of books by Muslim women scholars prior to the modern period in subjects of law and theology, doesn't mean that Muslim women scholars were not studying law and theology. In fact, we know they were, because we know people like Fatima bint Abbas or Aisha al-Ba'uniyya or other people who we know were qualified jurists. They studied, they didn't necessarily have students, or they weren't listed in biographical dictionaries, but we know that they learned, and that they taught their kids this, or taught their neighbors this, or taught whoever, maybe just themselves. So just because you're not a kind of an active, historically commemorated participant in this tradition doesn't mean that you're not in that tradition. So I think that's the first thing to keep in mind, that women were, and even if you look at like the women in the Mughal imperial household in India, you'll always see they studied fiqh, they studied Quran, they studied Persian poetry, they studied this, that, and the other, right? And some of them actually end up writing books, but they're all getting educated. So we also have to ask ourselves, like, who? Maybe the bigger question is, who has time to write books? And in any society, for most of human history, literate culture, the life of the mind culture, is created by an elite who has the luxury of free time. Most of the society is working to survive and to create a surplus to allow other people to have some degree of free time, right? And it seems like is that the people who tended to have free time in Islamic civilization were men. And there's only one person I've ever found who talks about this. And again, I would love to find Muslims discussing this. I just don't see it happening. One guy, Ibn Abi al-Wafa al-Qurashi, who's a Hanafi scholar in Egypt, he died in 775 Hijri, so probably about 1375 of the Common Era. He says that women in our tradition, in Islam, they don't write books because they're too modest. They have too much, haya. Yeah, there we go, haya, right? And that's the only thing I've ever seen of any mentioned by anybody in any way about why this is the case. And you can argue with that or not argue with that, but that's what he said. And you certainly have, you have the historical fact, which is that only a relatively small number of books were written by women, but again, that doesn't mean that they didn't study. It doesn't mean they didn't learn. It doesn't mean they didn't teach. It doesn't mean they didn't benefit other people. It just means that the way that they expressed all of that wasn't necessarily through production of books.
Well, Karima, again, coming back to that, is interesting again because she's a Hanafi. Well, it seems she's a Hanafi because she's from that part of the world that tends to be Hanafi. And so, no, she's not Hanafi. No.
I don't think she's Hanafi. I mean, put it this way. First of all, Khurasan, she's from Kushmehana, which is near Marv. Okay?
Right.
That's
Shafi'i.
That's hardcore Shafi and Hanafi territory.
Right.
But it's mostly, especially, and I mean, it's ironic that I'm drawing on my own research from God knows how many years ago. But if you look at the network of people who study and transmit the Sahihain, they're essentially all al-Hadith, usually Shafi, for a good 200-300 years after Bukhari and Muslim's deaths. So if she could be Hanafi, but I doubt it. I mean, it's just statistically speak. We don't know what she was. We don't know what her father was. But I would just, if the chances are that she's not Hanafi, it's a very small chance.
Oh, okay. So I'm going to try that again. So as I was saying, we know Karima was a Shafi'i, most likely, or maybe a Hanafi. But I did read someone, I don't know whose bio, where someone wrote that she was a Hanafi. So that's where I took that from.
Maybe I could be wrong, but I don't think she is.
But then one of the things is, especially women. Okay, in the madhabs, this idea of women traveling is very sort of non-existent. It doesn't happen. Women don't travel because of the fiqh of traveling that the Prophet ﷺ placed restrictions on female travel, and then also the family. And so what happens is Karima, what I read is it's her father who travels with her everywhere she wants to go, Jerusalem, Makkah al-Mukarramah, anywhere she wants to pick up knowledge. Her father is insistent that he goes with her until she finally migrates and moves to Makkah al-Mukarramah and passes away there. And I find that extremely unique in that role. So how, I mean, in terms of female travel, I'm assuming it was very rare. But that idea of the father making sure that his daughter, she wants to study, I will facilitate this for her as much as I possibly can. I was just thinking about that. I know you have a daughter, right? So then this would be right up your street more maybe. But in terms of this revival, because I know there's like a movement to revive female scholarship, how much inspiration can we take from the idea of that it was her father that facilitated this learning for her?
Well, I mean, I think we have to ask ourselves what's going on. I mean, what are these people doing? So a lot of especially Hadith scholars are not they're not like independently wealthy. They are merchants. So they are traveling. Where do they travel, right? They're traveling, if you look at the place, where are all these names from? Bayhaqi, Samarqandi, Bukhari, Darimi, Nasafi, Razi, Hamadani, right? If you took just put pins in a map of all these places, you're basically getting like Silk Road.
Oh, wow.
Right? So they're just, and what are they? There are a lot of them selling cloth or other stuff, right? So they're basically going along this circuit, the Baghdad Khorasan circuit, which is a mercantile circuit, long distance peddler trade. So some people like Bukhari, they're landowners. They have inherited money. Muslim owns a shop in Nishapur, which he rents out or something, right? But a lot of these guys are traveling, and so it may be that Karima Marwaziyya's father is a merchant, right? So that's why he's going with his family, not because he's traveling in search of knowledge. That's a side, that's part of what he's doing, but part of what he's doing is also traveling for commerce. So, and I mean, I was just the other day reading. There's this one famous scholar, Fatima bin Sa'd al-Khair al-Ansari. She dies in 600 Hijri, so about 1201 Common Era. But she moved to Isfahan. She was very famous because she lived till she was, about like 80 years old, right? And she was born in China. So she's we don't know where she is originally from, like where her family's from. We know that she traveled a lot in Iran, Iraq. She settles in Isfahan. But her father brought her to here, Fatima al-Juzdaniya, who is she was the last surviving student of a guy named Ibn Rida in Isfahan, who's the last surviving student of a guy named Tabarani, who was extremely old when he was about 100 years old, and he died in 369-71. So Fatima al-Juzdaniya, I think, died around 520 Hijri, so 1120s or something like that. So Fatima bin Sa'd al-Khair, her father, somehow she's born in China. I don't know what her father's doing there. Is he Chinese? Is he a merchant? We know that Muslims from the 700s are traveling along the Indian Ocean route to southern China, to places like Canton, modern-day Guangzhou. We know they're also traveling through the Central Asian route back and forth to China along the Silk Road. So she's born in China. Her father at some point brings her as a child to Isfahan, where he takes her to hear Fatima al-Juzdaniya, narrating from Ibn Rida, from Tabarani. Tabarani had 3 links between him and the Prophet, which is pretty insane. So he brings his daughter settles in Isfahan, and she lives till very old age, and she's then transmitting to people, men and women, who come to hear her very short isnad. So, but what's interesting here, the point is, she's born in China, her father is taking her around, and again, why would someone in Iraq or Iran be going to China? Yeah. And is just going along with the dad and on this activity. And by the way, this is not unusual. Like, how did you guys hear me?
Yeah, we got it. You cut out for a second there, but that's okay.
I mean, how did let's say Islam spread into Southeast Asia, or the Ba'alawi Sufi tariqa and things like that? A lot of these people are also merchants. They're Sufi merchants.
I mean, it's interesting, that whole concept. I was having a conversation with someone the other day who was just sort of like, this whole concept of, again, dunya versus deen, and it's just the whole concept of, okay, well, you reject dunya because the deen is where it's at, and I don't want to work, and I don't want to do this. But I was like, well, actually, there's a long tradition of scholars, Sufi scholars, or whatever scholars they may well be, and people who manage to combine both worlds. But actually, very importantly, they did their time, as it were, in the on a merchant trade or in the shop or whatever it might be.
Yeah, هو الذي سخر لكم البحر لتجري فيه الفلك بأمره يعني ولتبتغوا من فضل الله ولعلكم تشكرون. Right? We know that God tells us. You guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
How much is it still getting cut off?
Yeah, that's fine. It's fine.
Okay, so my point is that we know from the Quran that commerce is a sign of God. The ability to travel in search of knowledge is ayat's Allah, right? And so and we know that God, made riba haram and made buying and selling, and tijara halal. So there's nothing wrong with seeking rizq through business, through commerce. It doesn't detract from your standing in any way.
No. But again, one of the things I did want to ask, because I know you mentioned that the only people who get to think, you only get to think when you're not running after the next paycheck or just trying to keep food on the table for your families and stuff. I mean, in terms of your travels, and I know you're very sort of tied into this idea of Muslim political involvement, and Muslims need to sort of make alliances and come together and rise up, I think you are, from what I know of you. But at the same time, in the Muslim lands you traveled in, I mean, for example, like Erdogan in Turkey, there's this thing where it's like he put food on their table first, and then he said, okay, now that everybody's, well, they were, obviously they got a recession and stuff now, but everybody was financially well off, now we can focus on all the other stuff, where now that your mind's at ease. So do you think that's like a project that should be like, in terms of the revivalist project, is it get food on the table of people first, then focus on religious education, or can it be done in tandem?
I mean, I think that it's done in tandem. I mean, I don't. The modern world is very different than the pre-modern world. I mean, you have mass literacy now, mass capacity for education, school systems where in which every child in the country is educated, or almost every child is put into these school systems. So it's a completely different universe. So I mean, you have to do both at the same time, and also, I mean, just obviously, there's some parts of the world where there's extreme poverty and deprivation and famine, but for a lot of parts of the world, a place like Turkey, we could sit around and talk about, whether or not the economy in Turkey is doing well enough or something, or what is it. But I mean, people in Turkey are living 100 times. I don't want to say 100 times, but much better than people were in Anatolia 100 years ago, or in Anatolia 500 years ago, right? I mean, the average person gets more calories and better healthcare than even like a ruler or an elite member of society would have several hundred years ago. So I think it's in no way should you say that you have to do one before the other. These things have to be done in tandem.
You spend a lot of time in Turkey, so obviously I remember I was speaking to a brother recently, and he was like, you have those moments, when the Hagia Sophia, we had Dr. Yaqub on, who talked about the Hagia Sophia for us a few months ago when it came open again, and everybody got really excited. The Hadith has been quoted, my man rocks up with a sword, and everybody's getting even more like, we're back now, Yarmouk is happening or something, and it's like, well, everybody gets really excited, and then the next day you have this realization that there's still 1 million Chinese Muslims in internment camps, and Kashmir is still in the mess that it's in. And then in the recent proclamations that happened in Palestine, I mean, in terms of your travels, and I'm assuming you've done Malaysia and Turkey a decent amount, enough. These are, people see these now as like hotbeds. This is where it will all begin. These are the revivalist projects. These are the places where the noise is starting to be made, and people are taking a lot of inspiration from them. Where do you see maybe the most potential in terms of the academic conversations you're having and the students you see in terms of a potential Islamic hate revival?
I don't know. I think I'm more pessimistic than you. But I don't mean, I mean generally pessimistic. I mean I'm pessimistic about like the status of human beings. I don't think our activities, our economic activities in this world are not sustainable. And we either have to discover like cold fusion or something, or we really have to, over 100 years from now, if the world's still around, we're going to be living much differently than we do today. But the way we live today is not sustainable. I mean, I don't think so. I don't think about Islamic revival and the idea of somehow changing the layout of geopolitical power in the world today. I mean, I think about what happens when the layout of our entire economic and political life is totally disrupted or falls into ruin, and then what happens after that. I don't know if that answers your question, but I mean, I just think that you can't have the world today is controlled by and is ruled by people who use and exhaust resources and exert power and control over others in a way that is unsustainable, and that will have to change before any other significant change can happen in distribution of power and resources in the world.
Okay.
I was going to ask about clarity around, so in terms of what you mean by sustainable, because there's obviously this concept of
I mean, like environmentally sustainable. It's not. It's literally not environmentally sustainable. It's not. You can't. You cannot have the entire population of China and India even getting anywhere close to aspiring to a Western European lifestyle without essentially obliterating the environment of the earth for humans. And the environmental change and economic change that will be caused by that will be so dramatic that the entire way in which we think about power and wealth being distributed will have gone through some kind of major shift by the time that that's settled. That's what I think.
I was a pessimist. I'm notorious for being very pessimistic in my approach, but I think that's sort of really, yeah. But I think, like, don't you see, like, come on, in Istanbul, I mean, you're there and the bookshops are opening and the awqaf are opening and all of these things, the masajid, and even with the Hagia Sophia, there is that, like, spark of hope, right? In terms of, maybe, let's not go super meta, but if you come a bit more down to earth, okay, that sounds, earth is the dying planet, but you know what I mean, right? Like, there is something to be happy
Small
about.
steps. Are they not? What do they call it? The green shoots.
Look, I think that we just have to try our best in our own communities to create institutions that make the Muslim community strong, that enable kids to grow up knowing about their religion and identifying with it, and make them able to teach their children. That's what that's really what I think about and what I focus on. It's not that I don't care about other countries. Of course I do. I don't really pay attention to. I'm much more focused on, let's say, like Muslim life in the U.S. Because I don't. Whatever is happening in Turkey and Malaysia, it's not going to impact whether or not my kids are identifying with their religion 10 years from now. Or 20 years from now, right? And the challenges that Muslims face in Turkey and Malaysia are actually, in the end, similar to the ones that they face here, right? When the influence of kind of global, urban, progressive views of the world, with its skepticism towards religion, with its materialism, with its liberalism in the sense of abandoning any notion of like a good that can be identified confidently and then pursued, that it just do whatever you want as long as you're not quote unquote hurting anyone else, and refusing to come out with any strong ideas about what that hurt can be, or that hurt is not at all rooted in transcendent scripture. If that's just spreading, it's spreading in educated circles in Malaysia and in Turkey and in other places, and until sorry, someone just came in here and was worried it was going to happen. Until that's as big a threat to those countries as it is to our country, to Muslims here. That's what has to be dealt with, I think.
One of the things I found, I remember, I don't know which book you mentioned, and I really wanted to get your thoughts on him as a personality, someone who's very dear to, I guess, our side of the Islamic pond, if you want to call it that. You have a little page or two you wrote about Sheikh Zahid al-Kawthari, rahimahullah ta'ala, and his attempt at the fall of the Ottoman Caliphate to sort of hold on as he sees the moves of the Western colonial powers. I guess that battle that he fought is a battle that we're still fighting today. Even though his was very he was more focused on fighting the evil Salafis of his day, where he was writing a lot of material against them, but they could see the constant effect of this progressive ideology sort of taking over the Muslim lands that they had the fortune to live in. They were in Egypt and stuff, and they saw a lot of stuff playing out there that we're seeing playing out again. I mean, I guess, is it going to be the same conversation happening every single generation? And what do, like Sheikh Zahid al-Kawthari, rahimahullah specifically, I mean, you mentioned him a lot. I remember you mentioned him recently when you were talking about him and Sheikh Ghumari. Was he somebody that you found extreme, like, was he inspiration for you in terms of the work you carried?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Stood out?
Muhammad Zahid al-Kawthari, rahimahullah. I mean, his immense command of tradition. I mean, just his ability to know. I mean, the standard he sets for what we are supposed to know, for what we're supposed to like, what we're supposed to encompass mentally. His command of detail, his yeah, I mean, that's for me. It was just the guy is an ocean, and and also, that Abdullah bin Sadiq Umari talks about this in one of his books. In the footnotes, he talks about how, his brother Ahmed al-Ghumari and al-Kawthari would like get in these really severe debates and arguments and stuff, and then they would be friendly with each other. We have to, we have to be able to keep our disagreements in perspective, both in terms of, let's say like, the thing that happened in when I was giving my talk in
come to that, actually.
Wickham, right? So, like, Abdul Wahid, I think is his name. He's a doctor in the UK. You know him?
Tahrir guy, the Hizb ut-Tahrir
Yeah.
guy?
Very, very polite. Very, he wrote, he's very, very, very polite criticism of me, very, very respectful. He disagrees with me, but he's, and he says quite forcefully why he disagrees. He makes very good points. But there was never in my mind any doubt that this person didn't love me, that they didn't want the best for Muslims, that they, and that they were always, that he was always firmly within the tradition of adab in our and that even if we disagreed on this issue, that we actually talked on the phone after that. We had a long discussion, and by the way, it turns out we agreed on almost everything. I mean, we were much closer. Yeah, I mean, much closer than one would think. My point is that Kawthari had a very sharp tongue, and so did the Ghumaris, but they were also they also knew that they were all on the same side ultimately, and they were as part of the same tradition. And then you take even farther, bigger division, like let's say like Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. I very much disagree with Sheikh Hamza Yusuf's opinions on politics, very, very much. And I've told him that privately. I write publicly, but I try to do so respectfully and within how we're taught to disagree with one another in our religion. And then, I talked to him on the phone, and I have fond feelings for him, and I hope he does for me, and we will discuss stuff and have good, instructive, informative, and enjoyable conversations. And we're both, even someone like who is a huge Sisi fan, I can't stand. I can go on and on for why I disagree with the Sisi government in Egypt or whatever, or the UAE government. The people who are supportive of these governments, they're Muslims too. And if they do get up to do salah in the mosque and I'm behind them, I'll pray behind them and, give them salams and shake their hand. And that's what we owe one another as in fi haqq al-Islam.
Just to sort of bring it full circle now, though, that there is, we started off this concept of almost polarization, having that conversation. How much has that crept into our day-to-day understanding of Islam as well? So it's almost, where you sort of say, well, I disagree with so-and-so on their politics, or I disagree with so-and-so on this particular view, but there is this but there's a sort of gentlemanly agreement that we'll agree to disagree, it's fine.
Yeah, that's very important. I mean, we have to.
Sorry, I was just
if you
rather
look,
than this constant just battering of, you're wrong, these people are wrong. Look, I'm going to quickly go onto my Twitter with my X thousand number of followers, and I'm just going to, blast people.
Yeah, I mean, look, there is, it's fine for people to disagree. It's normal for people to disagree. They're always going to disagree, right? But they disagree on furu', not on usul. And, they may disagree on political issues, which are a question of implementation of usul or furu', right? So this is normal. I mean, people are going to disagree on this stuff. You can either behave civilly and create an atmosphere and a communal ethos of belonging and unity, or you can make it one of divisiveness and rancor. and I would much rather have the former, right? I mean, and just take look at this. Let's say what happened with Sheikh Omar Suleiman, my friend. With this like video, I didn't even watch the video, but apparently he's like pouring water. I mean, he did this like years ago, a couple of years ago. No one saw this. No one knew about this, right? And unless you think that Omar Suleiman is a mushrik, in which case you're an idiot, right? And then if you really think Omar Suleiman is a mushrik who's not fit to be a Muslim ruler or Muslim leader, sorry, then you're just a silly person. I mean, you're not a serious person, right? Anybody who's met Omar Suleiman or benefited from him knows that this guy is a really, really committed and pious Muslim, right? So why go back and like dig up some video of him from a couple of years ago that no one even knew about? It wasn't like he's beating up a kid or something. He's not like taking someone's haq away from them, right? He's just doing whatever, making some mistake or I don't know, whatever he did. Why would you go and publicize this? Like, that is creating fitna. Okay, if somebody wants to come and say, Jonathan Brown wrote this article and I disagree with him, fair enough. You know what? I wrote something, I put it out there, it should be criticized. That's fine. I have no problem with that. But if someone comes and says, I mean, even this thing at High Wycombe, like, Jonathan Brown, like I should not have said what I said. I don't think I spoke correctly, regardless of my view on the position. The way I said it was not appropriate. I already publicly said that it was wrong. I repent for that. But why would somebody come and be like, hey, look at this. Look what Jonathan Brown's doing. I mean, do you think that I good in the world or not? Not, and I guess you should try and undermine me.
I think if you could just say that bit again. Sorry, Doc, it's just that cut out there. But if you said something like, if people genuinely think, and then it cut out.
Yeah, if you genuinely think that I'm like a negative influence in the world, I guess it's good. It would be, you should point this out. But I mean, if you think that somebody is like a Muslim who generally does good in the world, I don't see why you should dig up mistakes they've made and then publicize them. That strikes me as a rancorous, and divisive.
I think with the Imam Sulaiman one, and I'm somebody who has listened to Imam Sulaiman, and I can say personally I have benefited from him. But I think the idea was that they felt that the act he did do was very egregious in terms of it was, if not an act of shirk, it was something that resembled an act of worship or something of the sort. And then he himself has apologized for the mistake he made as well. And I think...
but I have a question. Do you think Omar Suleiman's a mushrik?
No, but that's not necessarily the case, right? Just because...
Okay, do you think Omar Suleiman... I have a question. Why don't you email Omar Suleiman and say, hey, I just randomly watched this video of you. What's going on? Oh, yeah, you're right. But here's the difference. What if I go and say, hey, I'm going to take this video and I'm going to publicize it so everybody knows how bad Omar Suleiman is? Do you really think that's helpful?
I just, because obviously people saw him as like a leadership figure, and then they felt that was going to have a massive effect on the people who do follow him, and I don't know, because this idea...
So you don't want... So, I mean, people shouldn't follow Omar Suleiman because what?
Not necessarily
because he's a bad Muslim? Because he's not worthy? That's not true. I just don't think that's... I don't think anybody who spent any time around this guy would think that about him, unless they're demented.
Yeah. But I just feel...
I just think, what is the point of these of this creation of fitna?
So your point more is like, if you really wanted to be a force of rectification, then you should have gone about it differently rather than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, put it this way: why didn't somebody, like when I did this thing at High Wycombe, why did someone write to me privately and say, hey, I heard this is really problematic, I think you should take this out of the video, or repent or something, but take it out of the video? I think they should have, I think that's a really good thing to do.
We had that realization straight away, to be honest, and we were meant to actually cut it out. And then
Yeah, but I mean,
lost.
so well, thanks a lot, guys. But I mean, the point is, why,
Media team.
that would be like product. I would learn my mistake, and no one would be harmed by it, right? But instead, you have like hours and hours of people's lives sucked up in this drama, and a lot of this stuff is just about.
It also creates a circus around it as well. So it creates a Twitter storm. It creates a circus. It just creates that constant. It's just another talking point. And like you said, it's almost then that. It's almost then that energy. So we only have a certain amount of energy, and that a lot of that energy is then sucked up to and fro. It's going backwards and forwards. It's listening to people on both sides of the camp, and it's just it takes away a lot of energy. And one of the things I wanted just to very quickly raise as well. So I heard you talking on a podcast, I think it was, or maybe somewhere, but you talked about raising the bar. And you talk about people actually have a responsibility where they have a number of followers, or they have a platform, or whatever it might be, but Muslims need to really raise the bar. In terms of their dialogue, and just in terms of the conversations that they're having as well, because are those conversations useful? Are they fruitful? Or are they actually continuing to divide us, and they continuing to to pour?
Yeah, so look, I mean, I'm personally, like, I'm grateful that it was pointed out to me what I said. I'm grateful, actually, that was pointed out to me. It made me, I think it made me humbler. Like, I think that it reminds me to be humble. It reminds me, to never let my attempts to communicate or to get an idea across lead me into a terrain where I would be rude toward God and the Prophet, right? I mean, so it's helpful for me, and I always, I've had lots of my articles for Yaqeen have been criticized. Well, not a lot, a few of them have been criticized. And I always, I'm grateful for criticism. I'm grateful for like Shadi Masri. I'm grateful for Mubin Vaid. I'm grateful for Musa Ferber, people who've criticized my work. And when they make criticisms, I change. I'm happy. I'm always happy to have mistakes pointed out. Because I care about pursuing truth and helping people to understand stuff in a truthful and accurate way. But you can do that in a way that's helpful, or you can do that in a way that is destructive, and that is also clearly designed to create circus and to boost someone else's standing, right? And when your standing is based on tearing other people down, and not other people who are, again, if someone thinks Jonathan Brown's a bad Muslim and a bad person and an evil force in the world, I guess I can't do anything about that. I would think that a lot of Muslims don't think that about me. And I think that my work is good. So, if you're building your life and your brand and you're standing on tearing people like Jonathan Brown or Omar Suleiman down, Tahir Wyatt, or what are you offering? What are you offering the world? You're offering the world just anger and bluster, and that's not something that anyone can live on. It's not nutritious. It's just destructive, negative. It's not even understanding. It's not even an understanding of the religion.
Because one of the things, you're very famous for, at least, is Islamic apologetics to an extent, right? So Jonathan Brown defends age of Sayyidah Aisha, like those are things, Jonathan misquoting Muhammad, the whole book and stuff. And I was just thinking, like, in terms of Islamic apologetics, one of the things, these people, and I don't want to pick a side either way, but it's like those people who did come out against you very strongly tend to have made their name off of Islamic apologetics, that they are guys who defend Islam in the social media sphere in the age of Speaker's Corner. So these are guys who engage in Speaker's Corner's debate, and at the same time you're defending Islam on a very different platform. You're on Yaqeen Institute writing more academic sort of papers, and then these people, there's more sort of blustery shouting, cancelling people, debate, argumentation and stuff. In terms of like, obviously there's a massive debate now in the moment about cancel culture and things like that. Do you think that's, you know, like in Islamic history, that's not a thing, right? Like, I mean, the Khawarij were a movement who would cancel people in a very, very, very sort of nefarious way, but it's sort of seeped in now to our discourse as well, where we've taken on a lot of this discourse and the way we frame our religion, and that is like this sort of entertainment value that these people bring has suddenly they've become more influential than our Muslim scholars and the academics. Is that, I mean, I don't know, because one of the things is, and I really wanted to get into this, because yaqeen appeals to a certain crowd, and then you have Speaker's Corner that appeals to a certain crowd. Is there a way that you can sort of bring people away from that more to a sort of more academic discourse, or is there even a lower discourse that can be done without having to let things descend to the gutter?
Well, I mean, I don't necessarily know what Speaker's Corner is. I mean, if you're talking about like these sort of online dua.
No. So there's an actual thing in Hyde Park where they meet up, and there's a corner of Hyde Park which is called Speaker's Corner in London, and they literally, anybody can go there and voice their views, and they're going to be challenged and debates are going to take place. And so a lot of people have made their name based off that. Mm-hmm. You know, like it's a form of, they call it da'wah, which I've heard our teachers talk about and say, you know, like when we talk about da'wah, we talk about like Mu'in Chishti rahimahullah ta'ala and the great Sufis who came and spread the deen all over the world. But this is the modern equivalent of da'wah, where people have now decided to use that as a platform by which to spread the deen.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't really see the why these things are mutually exclusive. I mean, I don't there's Muslims have so much need. I mean, we need people to debate like Hamza Sortis does. We need people to do like, you know, John Fontaine and Eddie Dean and the Dean Show. We need people to need people to, I mean, that's one thing in yaqeen is like, we are never going to try and stop other people from doing stuff. We only want to help. If we can help other people, if we can offer them resources, if we can help magnify them, we will do so. You know, we're about empowering other people, other Muslims. You know, we need masajid. We need ulama in masajid. We need, really like top ulama scholars who don't actually talk to the masses, but we just teach other students and who write books, right? We need all these people. They all have their own jobs to do. We all have our jobs to do. You know, I'm not a alim. I'm not someone who can teach people about Islamic sciences. I write for a specific audience, right? Like everybody has their own job to do. And, it's fine to critique one another. Like if, let's say, Mobeen Vaid thinks that I make a mistake in one of my articles, he can and has and should critique me. He can tell me privately, he can write it publicly, but it should be done in a spirit of wanting to build other people up and help them and correct them in a positive way. I mean, just look at the difference. I tried to say this when it happened, but look at the difference between what some of the people who came out and attacked me over what happened at High Wycombe, the way they did, the effect that had on me versus the effect that like Abdul Wahid did when he wrote his. And first of all, Abdul Wahid and I talked for the first time. We met and discussed and became friends. Right? And the other people, I don't even know who they are because most of them are anonymous, right? But I don't want to have anger towards them, but my disposition is not positive toward them, right? They don't leave like a good taste in my mouth. So whereas someone like Shadi al-Masri or Mubin or Musa Ferber, or who are the other people who've criticized Yaqeen articles in the past? I can't even remember. Salim Sidat. Do you know Salim Sidat?
In Blackburn. Yeah.
In Blackburn. This guy, he sat down and must have given me like 2 pages of criticism of my Misquoting Muhammad book. Not once did I feel a single hair in my body bristle. Not once. He sat there and just gave me with as much edeb as you could ever imagine a human being given. Like look at how that person. This makes me love that person. Makes me value their criticism. It makes me mean, what are we building? You know,
I was going
what
to
are we
ask
building?
I was going to ask there do you feel that that's also then part of growth for you as well?
Oh,
And
definitely. I
in
mean,
terms of
of
that's
course.
what that process is helping. It's helping growth
Yeah,
rather
of
than
course.
just completely knocking down and destructing.
I mean, I can guarantee you, every single thing I've written has mistakes in it. Every single thing. Some have small mistakes, some have big mistakes, some have medium mistakes. You fix them, there's still more mistakes. You fix those, there's still more mistakes. Everything, right? Of course, it's important that people point this out. Again, they can point it out privately, they can point it out publicly. But the way they do it, are you saying, look at this idiot, what a moron, you know, he is a kafir, he's at the very least, he's a heretic, maybe even a kafir, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, this is, first of all the good in my work is then going to be lost to people who don't read it. I feel negativity towards that person. There's no silah being built between me and that person, right? Whereas if you come and critique, I can't tell you how many mistakes that have been pointed out to me about stuff I've written in the past. I mean, countless. And the people who did so, actually, a lot of them come out of Darul Ulooms. MashaAllah, I don't know what, maybe they're just taught really well.
Probably.
You guys' picture disappeared for a second, but the point is, people like Muntasir Zaman, Salim Sidat, right? Other people who have just pointed out literally dozens of mistakes I've made, and all I feel in my heart for them is love, and I immediately make the changes, right? I'm always open to more input from them. I look to them to correct me. We have relationship built between me and them, both like a relationship of brotherly love in Islam and also productive working relationship. I mean, that's what we should be building, not the stuff you see that's going on a lot today, where one, and by the way, kudos to Omar Suleiman, and to me, by the way, I'm going to give myself kudos, because honestly, if people point out mistakes, even if I hate those people's guts, if they're right, credit where credit's due. I'll make the change, and I'll maybe even give them a shout out. My book on slavery has shout outs in the footnotes to people who literally tried to get me fired from my job, but I was like, they made a good point. They get footnote credit.
Inshallah, we'll get a footnote one day.
No doubt.
I was just going to say, because the conclusion I'm going to derive from all this is, for adab we need good character, and that's basically Sufism. So the conclusion of this is basically, Jonathan Brown says, Islam, we need more Sufism in the world.
I mean, I guess you could say that. It can't hurt. I mean, look, there's something that happened the other day. And by the way, sometimes I don't actually follow my own advice. I should listen to myself more. I try, but sometimes I don't. I mean, the other day, this one guy in the UK wrote this article criticizing somebody. One of the things he did in the article was criticize someone that I like very much. And he said all sorts of inaccurate things about this person. And, I contacted the author privately, and I tried to get him to change some of the things. And then, in public, he didn't think that he should make these changes. But and then in public, I tried to criticize it as well as I could in a polite way. So look, there's some times when you have to get in public discussions. I don't think that there's no denying that. But there's ways that you can do it that build things, and there's ways you can do that destroy things. And I'd always want to be building and not tearing down.
Inshallah.
And part of that is, by the way, giving, is admitting when you're wrong. And I'll say that for myself, and I'll say that for Yaqeen, is that we'll always, if people point out problems, we're always happy to make changes, really.
On that note, thank you very much for your time. I think it's an incredibly important discussion, and I think hopefully, inshallah, people will listen and benefit, and then we can all
dissect and criticize.
Or dissect, but nicely.
Well,
No, I mean you can
advice.
dissect and criticize, but just ask yourself. I mean, look. Let me finish the thing.
Benefit.
If you really think that, let's just take myself. You really think that Jonathan Brown and his work are so misguiding in the world that they should just be thrown into the garbage can. Well, I mean, I guess if that's your view, then you really should go and tell people that. But I really doubt whether someone could think that, if they're a Muslim, I really doubt whether or not they could come to that conclusion with any kind of, without having some kind of malice in their heart towards.
Would you ever, like, if those people who have made I don't want to say a living, but they've really made a name of bashing Yaqeen and bashing you personally, is there room for dialogue there? Would you be open to having a discussion with them if they so came out and said, we want to discuss with you on these topics on a maybe?
Yeah, of course. I mean, Yaqeen and me and Omar Suleiman, I will always try and
have they ever
want
reached
to.
out?
Oh, well, there's a difference, right? There's a difference between saying, let's have a discussion, or even like a moderation. That's great. But when someone says, I want you to come on my show so that I can, then you're not, that's not about that. It's about them trying to gain more views by having a spectacle, like having a chicken fight or a cockfight, right? And that's not productive, right? But if somebody says, I want to reach out to you privately and talk to you, I want to, in good faith, I'm not going to sit and record what you're saying and then play it on the air. Or if they want to do it with a third party, I am always open for that. And I know almost. But why would I want to have? I have work to do. I want to write stuff as a scholar. I want to write stuff as a public intellectual. I'd rather be doing that than sitting around fielding angry emails and dealing with the stress caused by people criticizing me on social media. Like, I'd rather do that. If I can resolve these issues and these disagreements and these relationships, I would 100% want to do that. 100%.
Cool. Again, just a reminder as well, actually, that the library at the Karima Foundation, we do have your books available for anyone who wants to read.
They've been taken out.
They've been taken out at the moment.
Yeah,
they're very popular.
They're available. They're available in the garbage can at the Karima Foundation.
They're available
to
on the shelf.
To get there fast enough before the bins get emptied.
They are available for anyone who wants to borrow. And obviously, of course, I'm sure they're on Amazon and wherever else if people want to purchase the books. Again, thank you so much for your time, Dr. Brown. We live in interesting times.
I love you guys. I want to see you again. Hopefully I can come visit you guys again.
Inshallah, definitely.
We haven't scared you away completely, have we?
No. I mean, it's me. If anything, I always felt bad for you guys having to suffer through,
They really went like, this is, he's on Muslim.
Anyway, it's fine.
Because I have this.
He's upset.
Yeah, because I have like this nervous tick, and then I was making like my face was doing things that I was not in control of. So then that became a point that they kept pushing at. And then afterwards, I remember some guy actually made a Twitter page, I sent it to you, right, called The Guy Sitting Next to Jonathan Brown.
Yeah, it's me taking abuse is one thing. When other people get sucked into it, I feel really bad. So I feel bad for you guys, and I'm next time I come there, inshallah, I'll take you out and I'll buy you some tasty desi food.
No, we'll invite you.
I know you guys will invite me too, but I also want to try and rectify and compensate you guys for the pain you suffered because of me.
No, nothing. So it was a pleasure.
And again, it was a pleasure today to speak to you. I think there's again so much that we've learned, and especially about Karima al-Marwaziyya, I think is incredibly important that we continue, to do the work and continue. And
by the way, if she is Hanafi, then let me know and I'll make a public apology.
We will do.
Oh, I'm gonna go now in volumes.
Yeah, for sure.
Really, I'll come out and I'll do it, like while lashing myself on the back with some kind of wire or something.
Maybe you should start following Hanafiism.
Yeah, that could be.
Yeah.
As a result, but yeah. If anyone,
Maybe
again,
that.
lots of podcasts available. Karima.org.uk /podcast. If anyone, and we've had a number of really interesting topics, a number of really interesting discussions. So please do like, share, subscribe. All the Jazakallah khair, everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Okay, we're in Islam.